So by 1994, and it was later confirmed to us later in 94 and 95, that when Rockefeller hosted the Clintons, and there's that famous picture of Hillary Clinton holding the book about extraterrestrial intelligence at the Rockefeller Ranch when they were visiting out there. Mm-hmm. You know, yeah. Okay, so she actually is the one who stood up and stopped the briefing and said it's too dangerous. We're not going to pursue this. And ultimately, politicians are going to put their finger in the air and they're going to see which way the winds are blowing and see what they can benefit from. They saw this as a lose-lose situation. In other words, it was a situation where if they were to push on this, they would be stepping on some very big toes. Very, very big toes. How big? Several $100 trillion of world economic activity. Now let me back this up now. So the how is hard for some people to wrap their mind around when it comes to this kind of secrecy, but the why is the pièce de résistance. Because if you look at what these projects that are unacknowledged special access projects are doing, what they really have been doing has been trying to acquire, as this top secret Canadian document, the Wilbur Smith document in 1951 states, the modus operandi, the mechanism of action of these extraterrestrial vehicles, meaning the technology, the science and technology. Because if you're interstellar, you're not using Exxon Jet A fuel. You're not using a rocket like SpaceX and Virgin Galactic is using. You're not using something like the space shuttle. You're using some technologies that are the trans-dimensional end of physics, very high energy electromagnetic field propulsion systems that allow you to drop out of 3D space and appear at another point in space by going through other dimensions. Okay? Now, you can do that without going trans-dimensional by just creating energy from the so-called zero-point field and creating an anti-gravity effect, so you have lifters so that you can go 100,000 miles per hour, make a right-hand turn with no deceleration effect because you've created a bubble in space-time that corrects for one gravity. That's what a lot of the, quote, UFOs are that people see being test flown out near Nellis and the Dugway Proving Grounds in Utah, and et cetera and so on. We mastered gravity control October 1954. I was not a twinkle in my father's eye. Most of you weren't born at that point. I wasn't. And that is when we mastered gravity control. How do I know this? The third highest ranking official at the Naval Research Labs, the largest defense lab for the Department of Defense here in Washington, has been a friend for years, and he was in the vault and saw the documentation for this, unredacted, because it's all the original documents, and that was the date. So we have not needed jet engines, rockets, oil, gas, public utilities, surface roads, think about this, steamships, internal combustion engines of any sort, for at least 60 years. And if you really go back to the earlier part of the century, we're just plain free energy from Tesla-type things, 100 years. But you're stepping on a stockpile of money and commodities and mineral wealth being traded, oil, coal, other uranium, that's worth, in the aggregate, several $100 trillion. The U.S. federal budget is $3 or $4 trillion. And if you take out entitlements and things that are mandatory, it's a fraction of that. So it's the tail is wagging the dog here. So the financial interest, the petrodollar interest, the big commodity trading firms like Goldman Sachs, and the big money folks, that's where the action is. And those are the masters. Not the president, not the Congress, not the UN Secretary General, certainly, not the Prime Minister of England, etc. So let's just pull the mask off and just admit that we're living in a period of petro-oligarchs kleptocrats, klepto meaning theft, like a kleptomaniac, kleptocrats, and that this sort of myth of free markets and a free society and an open and free democracy is just a myth. Because our democracy was hijacked decades ago. Now, on trivial issues like the marginal tax rate or whether you're going to raise or lower payments for Social Security, the President and Congress can fight about that, and it's sort of this show going on, a whirling dervish show of nonsense that goes on. On these issues, they don't want those clowns, is how they view it, dealing with it. So this permanent, unacknowledged covert program has put a lead ceiling in. And only rarely does anything bubble up from there, or down, I should say, to the body politic out of these unacknowledged special access projects. So it became my task to find out how to do that and live to see the next day, all right? Because it doesn't do me any good if I do it recklessly and I'm dead. You can't do anything if you're dead. Well, you can, but it's, different. So you're doing other things. So this became really the central issue. And Lawrence Rockefeller, I suggested, look, we need to then, if the president will not do this, we need to get together a group of people, put together this best available evidence, and also assemble top secret folks who will have the courage to provide credible documentation, testimony about what they've known. So I suggested and organized a meeting at a Asilomar facility near Monterey, California, in June of 1995. Edgar Mitchell was there with me, Marina Popovich, who was a very renowned cosmonaut in the Soviet Union, some KGB officers were there, and some of the early Disclosure Project witnesses were there. Now this is 95, this is 20 years ago. And Lawrence paid for it, and Lawrence Rockefeller said, look, I will totally support doing this. And when I was with him at the ranch, I said, well, why don't you take a public leadership in this? I was talking to him out on his deck with the beautiful Remington Native American sculpture that's, the Native American on horseback, the very famous. Of course, they have the original of everything. And I said, I need your help. He says, oh no, it's too dangerous for me. He says, there are members of my family already jumping up and down on my feet that I'm doing this much. And I knew he was talking about who he was talking about, the money people in his family. He was the philanthropic guy who just wanted to give away his wealth before he died. That was his whole purpose. Really sweet man. And so I said, well, okay, I told him, you're old, you're rich, and you're a Rockefeller. I'm a nobody. I'm a North Carolina doctor who's trying to do this with no resources. He says, I'll be behind the scenes. And he took his old hands and did this, and he said, it's like a flock of geese. We're all flying together. I'll be back here, and you need to be here. I said, well, yeah, but that head goose gets all the head. They take turns. He said, no, you be up here. It was very comical. I said, oy vey, this is like, I said, okay, that's what we'll do then. And he wanted to just stay behind the scenes, but he was provide that support, hosted the Clintons. So we had something called Project Starlight that formed before the briefing of the CIA director. That was the code name for what became the Disclosure Project that all of you know about. And Project Starlight, with the AP, the Associated Press sued the Clinton Library and got those documents. Those documents are in my first book. And at Asilomar, we had all these dignitaries, including Kevin Foley and astronaut Edgar Mitchell and Marina Popovich, and all these folks sign a letter to the President of the United States recommending ending the secrecy. It's in my first book. Buy it, get it, see it, read it. And that, however, was the Associated Press a couple years ago sued the Clinton Library and got those documents, and they put them out on the internet. Now, At this point, we knew by 95, the president, with all the cajoling we could do, with all the work Lawrence was doing behind the scene, hosting Bill and Hillary at the JY Ranch for their vacations. A very good friend of the president's, I don't want to name her, but used to live at the White House and very good friends with Hillary, said that Hillary did not want to deal with this at all, but Bill was so interested in that, he would pull out the best available evidence briefing packet that we put together, and we'd be sitting in the private quarters of the White House going through it. And she's this hilarious woman who did a perfect imitation of Bill Clinton. And he said one time they put it out on the floor and she was sitting there with him. And he was going through it going, well, I know all this is true, but they won't tell me a thing, not a goddamn thing. Just like that, about all these secret programs. So when she told me that, I said, it sounds like Mr. Clinton. So from 95 until 98, I proceeded then to approach various members of Congress. And we had already started that process thinking, well, okay, if the president won't do an executive action and force his way to control these unacknowledged special access projects, maybe a member of Congress will have the courage to hold a hearing. And since we now have identified, first it was about a dozen, and then it became several dozen top secret guys that could be subpoenaed and swear under oath with penalties of perjury, federal penalties of perjury, if you're testifying before Congress. Go ask some folks who are in prison for lying to Congress about what they knew. And so I started assembling these folks, the first meeting of which was in June of 1995. I'd met with a number of them one-on-one, but there's strength in numbers. So I realized that if we came together as a group and they got to know each other and they felt that it was, they felt safer, they felt protected if they were all doing it together. You see what I mean?
Brilliant.
Okay, so that was what I did, is pull people together. Because these men and some of the women involved were terrified about speaking about this on their own as lone wolves. But I said, let's get a mass of us together and do it. So that first gathering was very historic because it was sort of presaged what we did in 2001.